Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Data Warehouse Automation, Nerve Center for a Data-Driven Organization. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speakers are John Myers, Managing Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates, and Heine Krog Iversen, CEO at TimeXtender. In his role as Managing Research Director of the Business Intelligence Practice Area, John delivers comprehensive coverage of the BI and data warehouse industry with a focus on database management, data integration, data visualization, and process management solutions. Heine is founder and CEO of TimeXtender, a global leader in data warehouse automation and big data. His passion is helping customers turbocharge their enterprises with the smart and agile use of data. And before I hand things over to our featured speakers, I did want today's audience to know that John and Heine will be concluding the presentation by taking your questions. So I do encourage you to log those at any time throughout the course of the presentation by using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from Enterprise Management Associates tomorrow that will include the on-demand playback as well as some additional resources. So I encourage you to check that out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, John Myers. John?
Well, thank you very much, Raleigh. And for those of you who are here live, and even if you watch the recorded version, because as Raleigh pointed out, we are recording, if you want to submit a question via Twitter or interact with us in real time, you can do so using my Twitter handle, which is at JohnLMyers44, the TimeXtender handle, which is at TimeXtender, and or the DWA hashtag. But it looks like we're going to have a great and fantastic conversation today. The first topic we're going to talk a little bit about is how data-driven disruption is really driving some of the concepts associated with data warehouse automation. So when we look at some of the data-driven organizations out there, and I would say that probably some of the poster children associated with data-driven disruption include Uber, Netflix, Amazon, particularly when you look at their Prime or some of their Prime Pantry offerings. You're looking at organizations that are fundamentally taking large amounts of data and integrating them into the way that their organization works, not just from a strategic perspective or from at the executive level, but really saying, how can we take the information that is available to us and push it farther and farther down into the organization so that individual employees can start to look for their own insights in terms of the information available to them, rather than just looking at, say, the billing and rating aspects of our operational information. How do we take that information and find fundamentally new ways to use it? I think Uber is a great example of saying, rather than just looking at how do we look at the distance information or the time information associated with a ride or a personal transportation option, how do we optimize that? How do we give a greater customer experience in terms of saying, hey, this is when your ride will be here. This is how long your ride is going to take. This is an estimation of the fare that's going to happen with that. We've even seen them go as far as to say, hey, we're going to give people information about estimates about when you will arrive with your ride. And that's all taking information that is inherent in terms of location, time, etc., and turning it from simply a rate into a much greater experience. You see the folks from Netflix doing something very similar. A lot of times when you think about broadcast networks, they're looking at, okay, let's take a sample and make an estimate of who has been watching our shows. The Nielsen operations have been doing that for quite some time. But the folks at Netflix, particularly with their streaming offering, are able to look at not only who's watching shows, when are they watching shows, but are these shows sticky? If someone goes about 15 minutes into a 30-minute program and stops watching and never comes back to it, that means that this content was not appealing to them. Conversely, if they go through and they watch content and they get to the end and then they immediately start the next episode in what I believe some people call binge watching, that shows that is a sticky piece of content, and they're really driving into those particular areas. Now, this is not to say that just these poster children are looking at data-driven organizations or taking these concepts. Over 40% in a recent EMA research, 40% of our respondents said that a data-driven culture was important to the way that they were doing their business. So this is essential. This is vital to the way they're doing it. We're starting to see these types of organizations start to bubble in. And some of the drivers of this are the concept that now we need to have our analytical environments. We need to make them move faster and things of that nature. Heine, give me a little bit of a sense of where the folks at TimeXtender are seeing this speed, if you will, or this integration of new and faster moving analytical environments into your customer base.
Yeah, I think that it's fair to say that the examples we saw before with Uber and Netflix is what a lot of classic business is striving at to become. They can't get there all the way because they still have the physical world. It's easier when everything you do is in the online world. But everybody is trying to find ways to add new data sources, add new data, new information at an ever-increasing speed. And it goes not only for marketing department and sales, which is where people normally is talking about this. We see a lot going on in the supply chain. How can we optimize delivery? How can we build a physical product that is becoming more personalized to each customer in a very efficient way? And to be able to do that, we need data. We need data about optimizing the production. We need data about our customers. What should we expect? What's the trends out there? So it's very interesting times right now to see how people are really looking at bringing in data, even that they produce the goods that are in the old-fashioned physical way.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that supply chain example is a great one because a lot of times people really all they want to do is have their expectations set from a customer care or a customer experience perspective. You know, you look at some of the advances that Uber has made, some of the times when you're doing an order during the holiday season from an e-commerce website, all you really kind of want to know is, hey, when will the package be here, or when can I expect something to happen? And being able to take those analytical workflows and being able to say, hey, with this new data that we have, how can we look at optimization engines? How can we look at these different components? And they all come together because, as we integrate new data sources, that really becomes kind of the hallmark of being able to say, how flexible can we be to meet those challenges?
Yeah, and I think that we call it new data sources, and of course some of these data sources are new. What I see is that for a lot of classic enterprises, it's really not new data sources. The new is that they start bringing in these data sources, these kind of new data, into a more analytical platform so that they can analyze on it. But it's basically information that most of the companies have had access to for 20 years. They never thought about how that they could utilize these data to actually increase the competitive advantage that they have. And I think that's where the real eye-opener we see right now in the companies are that they know that they have all this gold hidden somewhere. They just need to find ways to bring it into a usable platform, usable data storage so that the business users actually have a chance of getting some information out of the data.
No, I agree. I agree completely. And that's kind of brings us to the next concept that we look at here is some of those technological demands that are placed on our analytical environments by data-driven businesses. Now, if we kind of set the Wayback Machine to 5 or 10 years ago, sometimes not even that far, we look at our analytical environments have been developed a lot through a waterfall development process. Kind of trying to create that perfect environment where we develop and collect all of our requirements. We try to come up with not just a good design, but the perfect design. Then we go through our implementation, our verification. And a lot of this has led to concepts where we are looking at 12 to 18-month implementation cycles. I think someone once told me an old rule of thumb is that it was 2, 2, and 50, and it was 2 years to implement $2 million worth of cost and a 50% failure rate, because when you go between, the development of requirements for an analytical environment to to a 12 or 18 or two-year implementation cycle, it generally results in not really meeting the needs of the business, because the business opportunities associated with these data-driven organizations, they're saying, because they have competitors that are working at the same speed or sometimes faster at trying to meet these business goals. And if the business can't get that information into their analytical environment or be able to utilize it to push it down to the rest of the organization, you're going to run into a failure type of situation. And this is really driving data-driven organizations to take a much more agile approach to how they implement analytical environments such as data warehouses, data marts, et cetera. And one of the key components of this is being able to have that life cycle where you're talking more in terms of, say, 4 to 6 weeks to bring this new data into an analytical environment or make a change to an analytical environment, and to really bring these things together. Because, again, we're talking about, sometimes trends exist for a 3-month time frame in the marketplace, or even shorter if you're talking about trends that might be associated with social media. But if you can grab a hold of those particular trends to be able to say, hey, we have new data that allows us to work into those areas, it really becomes a great and wonderful way to meet those challenges and say yes to your business. Heine, from your experience, are you seeing these same types of things that, organizations were once kind of hamstrung by the waterfall implementation approach and are now taking a much more agile or nimble approach to the way that they implement data?
I think that still too many IT departments are hanging on to the waterfall approach. And I think the reason is that there's also some good things. It's a proven approach that secures quality in whatever gets delivered. The failure John was talking about, to my experience, is not often a technical failure. It comes down to that it's basically outdated. So 12 months later, it's not wrong what we got delivered in the business. It's simply outdated because we had to do something in those 12 months using a more modern approach like data discovery to get some kind of meaningful insight while we were waiting. So the issue is that the business side cannot wait. And another thing we see is that it's more and more difficult for the business to actually define the requirement upfront. And they need to see some data, work with those data in the analytical environment, and then they will, we're still missing this, or this was not exactly what we were looking for. So the agile approach is also very important in supporting that we don't exactly know what outcome we are looking for, but we need to find a way to have smaller iterations to work together as a team to get to the final result.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point that is important about these analytical environments, is that, you know, being able to put something in front of the business stakeholder and get some feedback. You know, I think it can be a very daunting task to be able to create that all-encompassing requirements document, and you know, you kind of almost feel as if you're writing it in the stone tablet, not necessarily for back in history, but when you write that all-encompassing requirements document, you're kind of like, okay, this is going to be the thing. And our business stakeholders are very much more comfortable in an iterative approach, as you talked about, being able to close that loop, to be able to say, hey, we've developed this. Does this meet your needs? How does this work in terms of your organization? You know, and then being able to have that iterative or that back and forth, instead of building up the walls between business and IT, really gives that opportunity to go, you know, hey, I like this one, but we just got a new data source. Can we see how it fits over here? Or, you know, we found that we really didn't need that level of detail over here. We can drop that, or it's not as important to us. But to be able to have that give and take, very much in the cyclical nature that we're seeing here on the screen, really helps to modify that. I think it also helps to build that trust between business and IT. Like you said, a lot of these failures are not failures of technology or requirements. They're failures of expectation, and they're failures of, you know, does the solution meet the situation right now?
Yeah, and I think, John, it's also important to understand that we see a change in the split of the workload between business and IT. The waterfall approach typically means that in the old days that IT would deliver the final dashboard, the final report. That was part of the delivery. What we see today is a different split, so that IT delivers data. IT delivers the data warehouse. It's governed, it's quality controlled. We have all the data. It might not be structured in a specific way. And then the business side have the data engineers, the data analysts using data discovery, data visualization tools to actually work on the data and build out the analysis and the reports themselves. So we see a shift in who is actually responsible of the different pieces of the BI implementation.
No, I agree with you completely on that. And I think another component that goes with it is not just are we able to share that workload a little bit better, but we're starting to get more organizations. You talked about finance and marketing, or marketing and sales being some of those core components that say, hey, I want some analytics to tell me how can I sell better, how can we market better. But we're also pulling in you know, some of the operational teams, looking at supply chain, looking at logistics, looking at how do we actually run our businesses, and those folks want to take that information as well. So we not only see more interaction with the business, but we also see more of these particular projects that are coming together for IT to work on, and those all require a much more agile, nimble, responsive methodology.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay. All right. As I just talked about, the speed of implementation is something that becomes more and more important. When we take all of these new projects that are coming together, so we need to add all those components up and say, it's not just we're trying to do one project faster. We're looking at a pipeline of projects from across the organization, and or a pipeline of changes that are coming from these components into the organization. We're also looking at that constant pressure to reduce costs in terms of how do organizations want to look at IT as being one of the components associated with that, saying, hey, how can we deliver better at a lower cost. And then we also see some of the obstacles that come up to these components. As I pointed out, if you provide the business with an estimate of 12 to 18 months as opposed to 12 to 18 weeks at the very outside, they may start to go look for other alternatives. And so I think that this really becomes the way that we need to be able to look at these components and say, hey, what is the solution that we can do to bring that together? And I think that one of the ways that we can really do this is to create a repeatable, scalable application that can be reused on an ongoing basis, that as we encounter each of these components associated with the demands from the data-driven business stakeholders onto our IT groups, is how do we put that all together and create a much more, and I don't want to use the term productized, because a lot of times when we think about that, we think about a production line or an assembly line that really commoditizes it. But we do need to be able to say, how do we productize our analytical environment so that the stuff that we can standardize, and the stuff that we need to spend our time on, we can spend that value-added components in there. Heine, where do you view the ability of being able to make it a repeatable and scalable process so that we can develop these analytical environments much faster and with much higher quality?
I think that the key is to look at every little piece that needs to be done in implementing not only the data warehouse, but also the front end part, and look at where can we automate. So by automating everything we can, we automatically free up resources to be spent on things that will add more value to the business. If you look at the old waterfall approach and the classical way of implementing a data warehouse, there's a lot of repetitive work that is very important, but it's basically based on two major components. It's based on the technological platform that you have chosen and how that works, and it's based on best practice. So if we take everything that can be based on best practice and all the knowledge we have about a specific platform, that means that there's a lot that can get automated. And yes, you get an automation platform, you get a tool set that can be used to automate, but the content is still customer specific. And that's where we see the fine line, is that automation is not about trying to guess what you want and guess what you need and put any meaning to your data. That's the data analysis job. IT has the need to find ways to add and exchange a data source in a much faster way than they're used to. And they can do that by using software that is making a lot of the tedious work like click with a button, because it's an option today to do it, and everybody should do it. Okay.
Excellent. Well, I think that brings us to kind of the whole reason that we're here, is to talk a little bit about what is data warehouse automation. I've developed what I consider to be a kind of a wordy definition, if you will, about data warehouse automation, and I'll let folks read this on the screen while I talk about it a little bit. But in my mind, data warehouse automation is about all the things that we've just talked about. It is the response to data-driven organizations that need a much faster pace of development of analytical environments, whether that be data warehouses, data marts, et cetera, to be able to, as we have more and more projects, and then maybe minor tweaks or changes to those projects, to be able to pull this all together and include business and IT all together in a framework that allows us to improve the quality and the implementation performance of that. A little thing that I like to show about what is data warehouse automation is that it's a little bit about data model design. Heine, you talked about that some of the components that we put into our analytical environments have been, I don't want to say they've been standardized, but we know how to do them through best practice, whether it be from a structure or a dimension or things of that nature. Part of it is in terms of database administration, particularly when we start to get into areas where, as we have evolved our analytical environments from just kind of a nice to have or an analytical piece on the side to being more core to our business, we've had to move to, hey, we need to have a development environment where we're going to develop. We're going to have a test environment where we're going to test it, particularly regression-wise against some of our existing reports or functionality, and then we move things up into a production environment. That's kind of the database administration part, and then that quality assurance piece. With any handcrafted concept, whether you're talking about handcrafting a piece of art or a car or a database design, when you put into that concept, a human being has to do this over and over and over again, you invariably introduce the chance for the fat finger. And it's not that it's an intentional error or a quality defect, but these things happen. I forgot to do that step. If we're able to bring all those things together and say, hey, let's put them, let's put this concept in the center and be able to say, let's really automate or productize how we develop these concepts. It allows us to take those jobs that we've discovered and said, we've standardized this, we know how to do it, we'll kind of put that in an automated fashion, and allows us to really look at those areas that are hard, whether that be from data model or database design, and to be able to say, hey, how can we focus our energies here to once again improve, standardize, and move down the pipe. I'd be interested to get your thoughts, Heine, about where you see how data warehouse automation fits together, if you agree, disagree, et cetera.
No, I completely agree on your drawing. I think basically we could add one circle, which is the operation. One thing for me that is key is, of course, how do we bring all this together? But we see that the data warehouse is becoming, and we use the term nerve center from a marketing perspective to explain to people that data warehouse is here to stay, and it's becoming more and more important for the three reasons we have on the screen right now, but also on the ongoing load of data. This is an area that people spend a lot of time. Data volumes are growing heavily. Number of data sources are growing. All data sources are, if there's not cloud sources, they run on virtual machines. So IT constantly move them around between the physical hardware. And that means that people spend way too much time on optimizing, constantly optimizing. How can we lower the load times on all these data sources? Because maybe 2 years ago, it was fine to have the data every night. We have customers that are talking real time. We can discuss in a different webinar what is real time, but at least near to real time can be delivered in a governed quality way through a data warehouse, through the nerve center. But that forces us to introduce machine learning and intelligence into the load process, something that you can only do when you productize your environment and not doing it by hand. So we see it in a little bigger picture with the amount of data sources. There was actually a survey last week, Salesforce.com did, that claimed that in 2018 we will see a growth of 83% of the number of data sources in an average company. it's very interesting how you will bring all these data together to the business.
Oh, no, I completely agree. EMA research has found very similar results, that it's not just the number of data sources, but it's the types of data sources. And some of it is organic in terms of, we have new applications that we want to run, whether they be mobile or online, but it also gets into the concept of mergers and acquisitions, where you've got organizations that are pulling, we used to have one data warehouse, and now we have two, or we used to have one or two marketing data marts, and now we have 4 or 6. And so you're really going to have these components that all work together. So I think that we've spent a lot of time talking about data warehouse automation and a lot of the drivers. I understand that you have Thomas Dunn with you, and he's going to show us a little bit about how TimeXtender's product helps to meet these challenges and really drives a lot of the automation concepts we've been talking about.
Yes, I'm along with you here. My name is Thomas Dunn, and I'm the CTO of TimeXtender. And I'll show you some of the things that you can automate when you build a data warehouse using a data warehouse automation platform. And Heine mentioned that it was some of the tedious, time-consuming tasks that you can automate, and I can't think of a more tedious and time-consuming task than actually documenting your solution. So that's the point that I will start with. So if you have a project like this containing a reasonable size data warehouse and a staging database, and you want to document that, so create some kind of technical documentation, it is just a matter of selecting documentation, select the document type, set up different specific options, and then it will be on your desktop, prepared here as an active PDF, where you can go from, let's say, a cube measure, for instance, like cost amount, down to the data warehouse table. You get all that information, and you can store this and save it as your version documentation for this particular version of your data warehouse. So automating documentation is one thing, but also automating some of the trivial tasks that you have to do over and over again, like setting up incremental load on a specific fact table. It doesn't have to be very time-consuming. It's just a matter of selecting that you want to run incremental load on a table, and select between different types of doing incremental load, either a source-based incremental load or target-based incremental load, and then you have it. Same thing with history for like type 2 history, slowly changing dimensions and stuff like that. It is just a matter of enabling history, selecting what options it to run with, and select for the individual fields on a table if a change in one of these tables should be either a type 2 change or type 1 change. So again, automating something that you just want to happen, but you don't really care about how it's done. You just want it to happen. Same thing can be said about aggregating data in your data warehouse. Set up, for instance, like monthly sales orders. Select on which levels to aggregate and what to aggregate, and it's done. Also, stuff like getting data in. And John talked about the speed of new data sources coming up. Well, connect to a new data source, get an overview of what resides in this data warehouse, and select what new data to bring into the solution and map it to the data warehouse. Since we have control of all objects in the solution, we can do things like for instance, impact analysis. So let's say something happens on a specific field in your solution. Let's say the quantity field here on the sales invoice lines. We could do a trace of and do an impact analysis and see exactly what happens here. It's being staged. There's a transformation where it's been multiplied with some unit cost, ends up as a cost amount field in the data warehouse, and is finally used as a measure in a cube along with 19 other measures, and we can see some other cube specifics. Also, having control of all these metadata also allows us to do the opposite. So let's go on a posted sales transactions fact table here and say we want to do a data lineage on the sales amount, and we will get a complete graphical display of this showing that this is actually a result of several fields being copied into it. We can see that this one is actually in a formula where some discount is subtracted from the line amount divided by the currency factor. And each of these fields and these transformations can then be followed all the way down to the originating data source. This gives us a very easy way to figure out what was done in this solution and how can we then validate the data afterwards. The next thing we can automate is the handling of multiple environments. So I just prepared two small environments here. So I have a development environment and a production environment. Or for instance, if we just take a look at the staging database here, we can see that I could have one connection setting for my staging database in one environment and another setting in another environment. And then I can use our multiple environments transfer feature to transfer the project from one environment to the next. So this is now a controlled process, and I'm sure that everything works in production just like in development or test. I can have as many environments along the way as I need to. One of the features that I've been really looking forward to showing you is execution, because this is where we can actually start automating also a very tedious job of figuring out what is the optimal execution of my data warehouse project. And let's just imagine that you by hand had to figure out how to run this project in multiple threads. You would need to know about all the objects, individual dependencies, and stuff like that. But we already have those in place. So if somebody comes in here and say, well, I just added another CPU, so you could add some more threads to this. And it's just a matter of saying, well, let's run this in 5 threads instead of 3 threads. And then the execution engine will figure that out and say, well, I can then run in this manner. And it's logging all this execution time and figuring out from load to load what is the optimal way of loading data in this load in order to get the shortest possible execution time. And even though the DVA platform here decides the entire execution order and stuff like that, I still have a way to go in and add my prioritizations to the execution. Let's just wait for this. It'll take a few seconds. So I can go in and add my priorities. So for instance, if I have some specific cube, let's say a finance cube or a specific fact table, then I can prioritize that as a blocking task. So the next time I execute the same package, it will take that into consideration, and it won't start anything else before it has executed what is needed for the finance cube to finish. And then after the finance cube is finished, which will happen here in a few seconds, I think, right after the fact table. So here, this is a finance cube. It's finished, so now I won't say hell breaks loose, but now it starts executing the rest of the project. You can add as many prioritizations to this as you want. So it could be like prioritizing the data transfer from a specific data source to as I mentioned here, a specific fact table or whatever.
Now, Thomas, when you're doing this type of analysis and optimization, give me a sense of how some of your customers have seen value in this in terms of being able to speed their execution or have a much better idea about how their implementation is going.
Well, when we first introduced this feature, which is nearly a year ago, we saw some of our existing customers' execution time go down by 65%. So cutting down the total execution time to 1/3, which was quite impressive. And we haven't seen any results so far that didn't have a 33% decrease in the execution time. And it also gives them a lot of additional reporting opportunities. So we save these informations. Let's just go to posted sales transactions here. So we can actually see a lot of statistics on what happened here in terms of the execution times. Did we spend the time on doing transfer, or did we spend the time on doing data cleansing? So what was the measurement in time? What was the measurement in terms of records, warnings, errors, invalid rows, and stuff like that? So we also save these data about the data, so we can continue to improve the execution processing.
So the automation just isn't about how do we do our designs better or how do we do promotion from one environment to the next, but we're really talking about how do we look at the core administration of these environments and kind of look at the, as we have new technological infrastructure, as you pointed out, threads, memory, et cetera, how can we organize the way that we do things so we can optimize for the windows that we have?
Exactly, and without having to redo everything or spend a lot of time to figure out how do we then utilize these new resources that have been added to our solution. So both, as you mentioned, and faster way to actually get to the finished data warehouse, but also tools to improve the operations of it and maintenance of it.
Excellent.
I might add, John, that for us, this is a very, very big component to support our customers in near real-time access to information.
No, I would agree. When you can identify, as Thomas was showing us there, visually what some of the roadblocks or the bottlenecks to doing that, it becomes a lot better at and simply saying, let's throw more hardware or more resource at it in a, if you will, in a willy-nilly kind of way. We're able to take an intelligent, documented, evidence-based approach, if you will, to those optimizations to meet the SLAs that the business is putting on these environments. So I think that's a great way to take a look at that. So, Thomas, do you have anything else you'd like to show us in terms of the demonstration, et cetera? Because what you're showing here has been very very illuminating in terms of it being graphical, it being all in a single environment, really being able to bridge those gaps between design and technology and implementation.
Well, I didn't plan for anything. There's a lot of features that I could show, but I'm sure that if anybody wants to see more, just get in touch with me, and then I'll be happy to show you everything.
All right, that sounds great. So as we come up here to 45 minutes past the hour, I think what we can do is kind of wrap ourselves up and get into some of our questions. Some of the questions or some of the concepts that I think that we need to really take a hold of here is that data-driven cultures and organizations have really altered the speed of analytical environment development. Proactive IT departments are going to reach out and really to say, hey, this is how we can continue to say yes to our organizations, how we can adopt agile or nimble implementation concepts, and then really use DWA to solve a lot of those speed issues that we're talking about in terms of how do we implement our platforms, how do we get data into our platforms, and how do we manage change within our platforms. So with that being said, I think we'll start addressing some of the questions that we have. Raleigh, I think we'll bring you back into the conversation to help us with that Q&A portion.
Great. Thank you, John. The first question, I'll start with you, Heine. John, of course, feel free to chime in. Heine, the question is, how important is data management infrastructure to make the data-driven enterprise a reality?
I think it's key, and that's why we use the term nerve center. There's a lot of discussions going on. If the business can get satisfied with using a discovery tool, a data visualization tool. The thing is that we still need to have a decent amount of control. We need to make sure that we can trust the quality of the data. We also need to make sure that we can control who has access to data. And this access to data is, as we see it, becoming more and more important as people are moving away from OLAP solutions and start using the data warehouse, the relational data model, as the core foundation for the analytics and the reporting. So we need to build all this into the nerve center and make sure that IT still can deliver on the SLA they have on the source system without having to think about, oh, do I suddenly have 500 users pinging on my CRM server? So how should I spec my hardware for that? So we see that the infrastructure in the form of having the warehouse as the nerve center is going to be a key component to any data-driven organization. Might add, it also comes down to the change in data sources. The business is buying cloud-based data sources, and if they're not happy with the functionality, they just get rid of it and move into another one. But what about the data? If you move from a cloud solution and stop paying your vendor, you lose your data. So you need a place to store all your historical data from the old cloud solution and even bring that from the warehouse into the new cloud solution is also what we see.
No, Heine, I think you really encapsulated that well. So I have nothing else to add on that particular question.
Heine, this attendee also had a two-part question. You had mentioned nerve center several times in your last response. This individual wants you to expand on the idea of the nerve center. Can you add more there?
I think it simply comes down to that if you're data-driven, then you should look at the data warehouse as your nerve center or as your brain. This is where we have all the knowledge that we then can utilize, and that's key. That's how we see it.
Great, thank you. Another question. This one was addressed specifically to you, Heine. Again, John, feel free to chime in if you have anything extra to add. This attendee wants to know, what education do you think the new workforce will need to handle your vision of DTWA?
I think the core education is that instead of being very, very good at writing code, they need to understand data. They need to understand data structures and data modeling so that they can utilize the metadata-driven approach to basically get to the data and then get some meaningful insights from the data. So I envision a shift from the hardcore developers into more hybrid between business and IT, business people with deep data knowledge. In the old days, you typically found those guys as financial controllers because they had to collect all these information and put it into Excel.
No, Heine, I agree with you. The one thing I would add to that is that I think a lot of the, if you will, the education that people need to work on if they're looking to find how do I build my skills is really that flexibility of design and to be able to sit and communicate well. Business stakeholders are learning more about technology all the time. As you indicated, technological stakeholders need to learn more about the business. But if you can sit and be able to communicate well, run those JAD sessions, run those design sessions that allow people to say, hey, these are the things that we think are important. I think one of the things a lot of times we find the tension between business and IT is getting stuck in that what do you want, what do you need, kind of standoff where the business folks don't truly understand what's available to them, and the IT guys go, well, we can do anything that you want us to do, just tell us what it is. And what we really need to find are people who go, hey, these are the things that we do well, and the business guys go, and these are the data sources we think are important. Bring those conversations together. I think that's going to be one of the more important things, is to be able to communicate, collaborate, and be able to make those breakthroughs of the third alternative to find the designs that are going to work.
Thank you, Heine and John. Heine, there are a couple of TimeXtender specific questions that I'm going to direct to you. The first is, which EDW architectures does TimeXtender support?
I would say that as a software product, the design pattern is up to the user. So because it's a meta-driven development environment, we actually give the full flexibility to any design pattern that the end customer decides is going to fit their business. So we don't put limitations on that. We claim that we don't do data vault, but we have customers claiming that they actually use the software to do that. But except for that, I think that we have customers running any source of design pattern.
That's great, thank you. And which platforms can TimeXtender pull information from?
That's a very good question. I tend to say any platform. And the way we look at it is TimeXtender is focused on deploying the data warehouse on SQL Server. But that also opens up that we can access data in any system that you can access directly from SQL. And then on top of that, we have a very strong focus on building intelligent application adapters. So if you have some of the larger systems, that could be SAP, that could be the Dynamics products, Salesforce, we actually have integration on application level, because when you are building on a metadata model, why don't we just reuse the metadata we can get from the data source? There's no need to actually reinvent the level of metadata. And also, we are adding functionality so that basically any cloud solution, any big data solution, anything we have a driver that can communicate from the SQL Server can be fully incorporated into the DBA platform.
Great, thank you, Heine. John, let's jump back over to you. How does DWA fit with existing EDW environments?
Well, I think that, Heine, I think this is one that can start with you a little bit, or you can follow up with it. But I think that one of the important components of any data warehouse automation solution is the ability that if I have an existing EDW, I can discover it, I can divine the design of it and bring it into my data warehouse automation platform, and then be able to use that moving forward to say, hey, this is what I have, my beginning, and now I'm going to start making my adjustments to that, whether that be dev, test, production types of rollouts. Heine, I know that you guys have that ability, if I'm not mistaken, to discover existing analytical environments and be able to reuse them without having to redesign or redo some of those components.
Yeah, we have taken several different approaches in this area. Some customers are using functionality to basically re-invert the existing. So if you already have your EDV design in place, we can basically read that design and turn that into the metadata model. You then have to map your data sources into the model if you want to have the full data lineage. What we try to encourage customers is that bring in whatever you have, either, and also only pieces. We can have what we call external tables, which is basically where we put an umbrella around everything that is already there, including the SSIS and all the code generated. Now we can move it from environment to environment. It becomes a governed solution, but there's no need to start undoing and redoing an area of the solution until we need to make a change to it. So it's, for us, it's very important that you can basically continue adding the value from data warehouse automation to the existing environment without having to start all over. Because that would prevent a lot of companies from doing this. They have spent 10 years building out on SQL, but at some point they get to, we want to upgrade the SQL server, so we have to redo these parts. Okay, now automate these parts instead of redoing them and then have to redo them the next time you have to upgrade. So it's about finding the balance between where does it really add value to move from the classical approach into the automated approach.
No, I agree, and I think that's a great component because, when I talk about data warehouse automation and I teach the practices of it around the country, I always get a lot of people who talk about, well, we've invested significantly in our existing design. How does data warehouse automation fit into that? And I think you've laid a great case for how TimeXtender can help people reuse their existing designs without having to, reintroduce them, if you will.
Yeah, I think, John, the key here is, as we had earlier in the talk, is that we don't have time. So time and speed is becoming the essential. Cost is still important, but speed is even more important. So there's no way that you can go back and tell the business, well, it will get better in 24 months when we have transferred everything into a new platform. We need to be able to move into the automated platform at the same time increasing the speed in which we deliver to the business. We don't have the luxury of shutting down the system for a year just to make it better for the future.
Yep. No, understood completely.
Thank you, Heine and John, for taking those questions, and I wanted to thank our audience for attending today's event. Do be on the lookout for the email that will come from Enterprise Management Associates tomorrow. It will have some beneficial resources for you. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.